Do you feel picked on today, Ms. Van Meter? I want to discuss, and I know I talked with you about this one, about how we place students in intensive reading classes. As hopefully we all remember, the state legislature heard us that placing students automatically in intensive reading classes on test scores was not doing our students, was not doing right by our students. But I'm still puzzled that we're doing it as a district policy, and that parents aren't understanding that they have a choice. And so my understanding, and I've talked to a lot of people, is that we're not using FSA because we don't know if it's valid, but we're still using a test score. That district policy is that we're looking at FAIR testing, and we're telling parents that based on their FAIR test score, they're being placed in intensive reading.
That is but one measure that's included, Ms. Nacey. What we're looking at is students in 7th through 10th grade. If they scored a level 1 or a level 2 in 2013-14 and 2014, so 2 previous years, if they scored a level 1 or 2, they will be placed in the intensive English language arts class. If they scored above an 84% on their FAIR test, then they would not have to be included in the intensive English language arts class. Now, I will let you know that we have included a letter for parents to sign, letting them know that if they choose to take their child out of the class, it is their option. However, we are still responsible for meeting graduation requirements, and they have to pass that 10th grade English language arts test, whatever it is. If it's FSA, at that time, it must be passed or they cannot graduate from high school. So we don't have a lot of opportunity to remediate children and give them the assistance that they need. We talk about directive guidance, where we're telling parents that this is what should be done to address the deficiencies that this child might have, but the parent can make the decision, but we're asking them to sign and make sure that they are aware that they must pass this or they will not graduate from high school.
When are they getting the letter? Because the parent that you and I have talked about.
If any parent that is coming in and having a conversation with the administration at the school. Now, Ms. Nacey.
So wait a minute. So the parents that aren't coming in, like the parent that you and I have talked about, until I told her it wasn't mandated, up until that point, she was told your daughter has to be in intensive reading. So she didn't know she had an option. So until she questioned it, or if she hadn't questioned it, she would not have received that letter, correct?
That is correct, because the best thing for that child is to be in the intensive English language arts class. That is the best decision for that child, and that's what guidance counselors will have that child registered for. If the parent doesn't want it, they can come in, they can have that conversation, and then they can make a decision together. But the parent has to understand that this is our way of remediating children, addressing their deficiencies, and getting them ready to pass the test so they can graduate from high school.
So you decided what was in the best interest of the child without including the parent, is what you're telling me?
Well, based on the recommendation on their past history on the test, they were put into the reading class. If the parent doesn't want it, then they have to understand that it still is a requirement for graduation.
But see, what bothers me and why I pulled this today is, and this is where you and I philosophically disagree, is that you made a decision without including the parent in what was in the best interest of the child. Well, and that goes against everything I believe in, Cindy.
When you say you, it was the guidance counselors and the teachers at that school working with that child. They know the child's history. They know the child's strengths and weaknesses at the educational setting. And they made the recommendation and put the child in that class. Yes.
That's my, and whether, and if, where's the parent? That is a huge.
The parent does sign off on the registration form where they either agree or not, and then that prompts conversation. Absolutely.
But they don't have all the information, and that is, to me, that is disrespectful to the parent because you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what their issues are. You don't know what elective you're taking away from them. And I guess for you, it really bothers me for you to stand up there and say that you know better for that child than the parent. And that is what she said.
She said it's a recommendation. The question is that clear to the parent that we recommend very strongly? And if they don't know that a recommendation means they have an option, then the question is, do we need to elaborate on that? But I see a difference between a recommendation and a mandate.
And remember, all of these course selections were made way before we even knew the status of any of the FSA tests or the fact that they were going to be put on hold. All of this was, the students had already registered for their classes for next year. So as far as developing looking at the 13, 14, the 2 years prior, the level 1, the level 2, that is our reaction to the language in the legislature that put everything on hold. And there will be no test results until September. But mind you, we have rehired many reading teachers whose main goal is to help prepare children to get ready to graduate from high school. We are charged with that.
And the best way to get kids to graduate from high school is to have the parents be a part of that decision and to understand what's at stake, and to exclude them is wrong.
Well, Ms. Nisi, with all due respect, we're not excluding them. They are always part of the decision-making with their children, and they can contact their school's guidance counselor and have these conversations at any time. But I can't contact thousands of parents. The schools are working with parents to do what is best for that child.
I understand.
There are some parents that aren't even aware what their child's FCAT tests were 2 years prior to this year. But those are the benchmarks that the school has to work within. What is best for that child? And that's called directive guidance. And that's what they have to do. They're charged with graduating that child.
Okay, well, and like I said, we're just having to agree to disagree on this. It's nothing personal.
No.
If this were my child and you were telling me that you know better than I do, I would be really offended. And the trust level, we have a trust issue between the public and our schools to begin with, and to know that I was left out of such a vital decision would really upset me. So, Mr. Craig?
So I appreciate you bringing this up, Ms. Nisi, because I'm probably the one person up here who has this, I live this through my son. So he had his transition IEP before the law changed. And I can tell you, as a board member, I understand the changes in the law, and I understand what the responsibilities of the district are. But as a parent, all I can do is read in the paper that the state has changed the law. My son, as one of these, is a student that got a 1 and a 2 for 2 years in a row, and has been in intensive reading in 8th grade. In the transition IEP, it was then that he would continue into the 9th grade as well, because of exactly what we thought was the law at the time. But now the law has changed. And so I go back, I understand what Ms. Nisi's saying, because no one's contacted us to say, hey, there's a change in the law. We'd like to revisit this with a guidance counselor. You may have read about this in the paper. And I think this is really critical. And I know it's not that you need to do that,
right,
but we need to get that information pressed down to the school level so that over the summer we have people that are reaching out to these students that we're trying to do the best for, and so that the parents understand what the new law means, because it truly has returned local control over what we can and cannot do for our children. No one's contacted me to say, hey, the law's changed, doesn't have to go into intensive reading. Now, intensive reading may be exactly what he needs. I do not disagree with that, but it's a conversation that has to occur with the parent involved. And I understand my son has an IEP, so I have a vehicle for that conversation. There are other people that may not have an IEP or that have another, maybe something that doesn't create that dialogue, that we need to make sure we're reaching those people. And maybe I'm simplifying it too much, but that's what we need to do. And I don't care how long it takes our guidance counselor. We need to find and touch those parents to include them in the discussion about their child's education. And it may very well be that that's exactly the right place for them. It may also be that it's not in a few cases. And maybe the parent knows some things, just as the educational situation is known by the teacher and the guidance counselor inside the school. The parent has a pretty good knowledge of what's going on in the home and outside of the home and over the weekends. And perhaps that needs to be part of that discussion. So I implore us to reach out to the parents specifically on this issue, because we need to have them involved in the conversation. We cannot just go, well, you know what, the law changed, but we're going to still continue down this path at the district level, and because we're not reaching out. I mean, that's bottom line. Maybe there's a plan to do so. I don't know, but we're 2 months from, or less than 2 months from starting school, and there hasn't been that discussion. There hasn't been that outreach.
Misty?
I would agree, and you guys are going to get so tired of hearing me say this, but communication. If we hope to be a high-performing district, if we hope to do the best for our kids, if we hope to really collaborate as a community, as educators, as everyone, then we have to pull people together for those conversations. And I think it's enormous that we get that word out to the parents that your child is being identified and recommended for participation in this class. The law no longer requires that. We do feel it's in the best interest of your child based on these factors, and this is why the recommendation was made. But you have a choice in this, and we want your input on this. And in addition to input from the parents, I would say we absolutely need to get the input from the teachers. Because although I have enormous respect for our guidance counselors, they may not know the intricacies of that student as well as the teacher would. And the teacher may say, you know, this student would really benefit from a CTE class or something other than remedial reading classes. Based on what they're seeing in the classroom, they may feel that they don't test well. There's so many factors there. And I feel like if we're going to do a good job for our kids, then we have to have those conversations. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we're educating our parents so that they can take part in those conversations productively.
Karen, do you want to weigh in?
Well, I'll go back to, and I agree with what everybody says. I also sort of think I heard Ms. Van Meter say that, you know, the teachers do weigh in. But if we look at this entire yearly process, the kids came home with their new course selection, I want to say it was sometime in March. Maybe it was later than that, but, you know, legislation hadn't even been changed yet. So, in fact, our legislators had to go into overtime this year because they couldn't come to agreement on a lot of things. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Again, I really think that I'm not trying to deflect from the responsibility of the district, but when you make changes at the last minute, you put people in positions where they have 2 months before school starts, and now everybody's in an uproar because they didn't understand what happened. Well, we're all still waiting. That's why nobody made a decision early enough to allow people to put stuff in place. Now, we could have put stuff in place back in March, assuming that that's what they were going to do, but then they would have changed their mind, and then we would have wasted our time. It's a vicious cycle, and I really think that, you know, we're doing the best that can be done under the circumstances. And, again, I think that kids signed up for this a long time ago. We all had input at that time. Yes, does there need to be more communication? I agree with that, but I think that we kind of have to look at the bigger picture and, why we are here. And I don't think it's all the district's fault.
Well, I think at a minimum, every child that's going into intensive reading, the family needs to get a letter. Otherwise, we're going to get well, why didn't I know? And we're going to have, look at what happened with the whole FSA.
And that's fine.
Look at the third grade retention and the whole grade card, and look at how many memos we had to send out about that. So I guess if there's going to be a letter, I want everybody to get the letter. I don't want there to be any confusion. I mean, that's the first thing. And in that letter ought to be a number for their school of someone that's actually going to return the call, because I hear a lot of people say, I call guidance and nobody's there. So they need to know at what time period is someone going to be in the office, because I know that there's different hours that there's going to be certain summer hours at the school. So whatever hours there's going to be or what calendar someone's going to be in the school, I want those hours identified. So I don't want the message going into a voicemail that's not going to be answered until the third week of August. So I want that identified. So if the parent wants to have follow-up contact, I want that on there. And then that way it's on. That way the parent has someone to call and ask questions. Because you're right, there's going to be parents that are fine with us moving forward at that. But I want there to be a vehicle for the parent to say, oh, I do want to come. I do want to at least talk to someone on the phone about this. I want to have a conversation about it. Yes, Andy.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the letter, because Mrs. Van Meter did say that they do have to sign off on them taking the class. Is that correct?
On them not taking the class.
On them not taking the class.
If that's the parent's decision.
Well, then I agree. There needs to be something up front explaining to them that this is a recommendation and what might happen if they don't take the class, so that they have all the facts in front of them. But I also just want to say one more time, I don't see where as a recommendation is telling a parent that staff knows better than the parent. That's their job as experts, is to make recommendations and what they feel is in their best interest. So I just, in Mrs. Van Meter's defense, I thought that was a little bit harsh about calling her out on that, Ms. Neese.
I suggest you go back and listen to the tape, because that is what she said.
If I could just add on to what Ms. Henderson said, and that is, I don't think we are at a point where we necessarily need to point fingers or place blame. I think we just need to have the conversation about this is where we're at and how do we move forward.
Agreed.
And so I think in that spirit of looking at it, I think it's just important for us to consider the importance of including the parents in the conversation, and whether that be a letter going to them saying your child is being recommended for this because this is what we feel is in their best interest based on these scores. If you are interested in discussing this in more detail or looking at other options for your child, please contact the school. I think that at least lets them know that it is in fact a recommendation and that there may be other options, and that we value their input in planning for their child's future. And then we move forward from there. But I think the bigger picture is keeping in mind that focus on communication as a whole and partnering with our parents, our community, our educators, equally in the decision making for the children as much as possible.
That's why you're the communications major. She's the wordsmith. So, and that's what I'm looking for. I know you have the best interest of students at heart, Cindy. I've never doubted that. I want parents to feel included every step of the way, and this felt like such an exclusive process that it pushed a button with me and I saw red.
You know, Ms. Neese, one of the parents that you're referring to has actually sat down and met with the principal at that school. And my communication from that principal is that they agreed and this was the direction they were going to move in. And that was after this communication went out. So there is communication going on. Was there a letter? No, and we can take care of that. But I do know that there are conversations with parents about their children's education.
This is the last I'm going to say, I promise, Ms. Van Meter. I agree that there are conversations going on out there. My fear is that we are reaching a very tiny percentage of the parents.
I understand that.
And so my request for the letter really speaks to making sure that we're including all of those parents that are impacted, because we will always have some that are involved and are having that dialogue. But there are others that aren't comfortable doing that for whatever reason or don't have the knowledge to even know that they can have that conversation. And so I think this is just one more step in including all of our parents.
No problem.
Because the only reason why she knew to ask is because she knows me and I work with her daughters. And in fact, she's going to be going back and having another conversation because she talked with me again on Sunday. So yeah, that decision's not over yet.
Okay.
So, and, we both want the same thing.
We do.